What is up, Scrub fam? Richard Zapp here with my boy Jose Mercado. Jose, what's going on today?
Hello, everybody. Super excited to go into class. Woo!
Woohoo! That's
Woo,
the
woo, woo, woo.
probably the only class that anyone has had in the last 3 months. But yeah, we're super excited to be here. Full backstory: as you know, we here at 3XG we pride ourselves on being on the cutting edge of deck building prowess, and I think a big part of that is not only because we uh, practice and apply what we learn in practice. But there's always a ton of theory behind what we do here. Recently, if you viewed the YouTube channel in the last 24 to 48 hours, you have seen Dredgeku, our latest Series 10 creation, what we currently think is probably the strongest deck previewed yet on for this Rise of the Unison Warrior set. However, one of the cool things about that deck is it kind of aligns with the old school Magic Dredge kind of decks, which are decks that really focus on abusing interactions with cards going into the discard pile. And this deck, one of the first times in Dragon Ball Super history, relies on that more than almost anything else. The last time it did, I would say, would actually be Agents of Destruction Dende, which was also one of the most fun times I've had building a deck. But as me, Jose, Matt, Briscoe Foss, Patonil a bit, worked to make the list that we had. We noticed there were some really strange things about it. The ratio is very, very awkward. The fact that it's 56 cards, taking advantage of the new rule coming up that decks can be anywhere from 50 to 60 cards. Um, just very abstract list at first glance. The fact of the matter is that we used a ton of intentionality behind why we ended up with the ratios and cards that we did. Now, if you're interested in the synergy of the deck, how the deck functions, what your main combos are, then viewing the previous video, which will be in the link below, it would be a great place to start. If you're interested in the why behind the cards and the ratios that we did, you are in for a treat
So,
today.
so you're telling me what you're telling me is that even though now I have a leader that bursts on both sides, I don't need to play 60 cards. Is that what you're saying? So there's actually some math behind it that I can figure out the exact number of cards that I need to do to have.
Exactly. Exactly. We're
Awesome,
gonna cover
awesome.
all of
I'm
that.
ready.
All of that. Jose here, definitely being seasoned in the space, but wanted to learn some more and wanted to show his insights. So he's excited to be here. So
Fantastic. Because I was gonna just slap 60 cards on every burst leader
yeah,
right away.
forever and ever and ever. Too funny. So our goals for today: we talk a little bit about hypergeometric calculations, what they are, and how to use them. And the time that applies the most in your deck building decision making and in your opening mulligans. Because for the most part, people value your ability to draw well. If you draw poorly and you lose, that usually tends to be what people blame it on. So prioritizing how to open well and how mulligans go into that complex equation. So, what are hypergeometric calculations?
No clue. Enlighten me. No clue what that means.
So hypergeometric calcs look at how probability is affected. When you think about things like your chances of rolling a 7 when you roll 2 dice, when you are playing Go Fish and you guess, they have 7s whenever you've already seen a 7 somewhere else. What are the chances of when you're playing Texas Hold'em that they have a full house? These are all things that you use the knowledge that you have and the knowledge that you don't have to logically deduct it. And hypergeometric calculations tend to make that.
So
Um,
you would say it's a way of like predicting how often I can draw certain cards, so I can use it for that.
how often you should. Fact of the matter is, uh, at the end of the day, you can't control what happens. You can have your good days or you can have your bad days. But if you define what consistent is, and we'll do that through this video today, and you operate in trying to build for that level of consistency, you're increasing your chances of hitting the goals that you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So as I said, we're gonna look at how to determine your probability of opening cards, your probability of how mulligans affect that, and then specifically with the Dredge Goku deck, looking at why we had 56 cards and why we have a certain number of cards that we want to mill and how that makes up a certain percentage of our deck. So
Sweet.
again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the deck list here for this mono green Dredge Goo, But as I said, it's an archetype that takes advantage of using the burst 3 on the leader, try to mill cards. We see cards like Hasty Dispatch Dispo, Insane Instinct, Son Goku. But something we found is that at 50 cards, uh, you attack 5, 6 times, you're decking out. And at some point, it becomes a devaluation to swing with your leader. And we don't want that. We also know that the leader on Awaken, he often demands drawing a block turn 1 to awaken turn 1. And the longer the leader goes without awakening, the less valuable it is. So understanding how to open as consistently as possible without degrading the quality of her hands through the rest of the game. Super essential.
So like that, you mentioned here that was really important because this is the one thing that actually got me scared when I look at these leaders. Like, wow, how am I need to play as much cards as possible now because I'm bursting all the time. I'm not gonna stop bursting on the backside because I still want to draw my card. You know.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that up because that's one of the concerns that I had right away with
Yeah.
leader.
Exactly. Not to mention when you're trying to resolve Goku apes or you're resolving super combos for free draws, at some point it starts feeling like you're hurting yourself more than helping yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's define consistency because that's a very, very abstract term. And to be honest, when I look at consistency, it varies based on the size of the event. So when I'm considering what kind of deck to play at an event, um, generally there's two goals. Either I'm playing to top, I'm trying to get into the top cut so I can show off my cool fancy deck, or usually the top cut is where you're most likely to get eligible for prizes. Or if you're filling yourself, maybe your goal is to win. But the fact of the matter is if you're playing to win, you first have to play to top in the first place. So a lot of the math that we're talking about is going to focus on that. Um, when we're looking at in a vacuum when it comes to consistency, anytime that I'm round, I tend to round in the way that is less favorable. Um, at the end of the day, I define consistency as if I play correctly and my opponent plays correctly, what are the chances of my deck being able to do what it wants? So let me try to quantify that for you. When we look at the average Dragon Ball Super card game tournament, um, games are generally best of 3, right, Jose?
Yes, sir.
And in your experience, they're what, 8 rounds or so?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the highest we've seen is like 9 rounds, but it's very rare. It's
right.
always between 7 to 8 rounds. Yes.
Exactly. You have to hit over, I think, 256 people to get into a 9 round event. So planning for an 8 round event, I think, is appropriate. And you have plenty more W's than I do. My experience has been, if you have a record of 7 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw, it's very likely that you top. If your record is 7-1-2, or I guess it'd be 6-1-2, or 7-2-0, you can top, but it's not guaranteed to happen. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yeah. So then you'll depend then on strength of schedule and other variables, right? At that
Exactly.
point.
Exactly. But so if you can put yourself in a position where you're going 7-1-1, or I'm sorry, that should have been 6-1-1, in an 8 round event, um, you're defining yourself as a.
Right.
So when we apply
Yeah.
that logic into an 8 round event, so the it is possible for you to go 7-1-1, um, ignoring. So let's say that tie. Usually that tie is going to be a 1-1, right? So you lost one game from your tie. Um, you lost 2 games in that one round that you lost, and then if you lose 2 games anywhere else, you're out of the tournament. Which means that you could lose as many as 4 times and not be able to top if in the
Okay.
most unlucky situation. So 20 out of 24 means that as long as you're winning at least 83.4% of your games, you can count on yourself topping. Or the other
Okay.
way to look at it is if you lose more than 16% of the time. So did I round that
And
83? What was that?
and this is assuming top 16, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that'd be about top 16. Yeah, in my experience, that's probably where you're
Yeah,
so
it's the
far
most
most likely to
common.
go.
It's the most common tournament spread is when you get top 16, not top 32.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And while this may sound a little arbitrary in the sense that we're using your probability of topping for for success, this number somewhere between 80 and 85% just seems to come up in everything. You think about poker. You sit at a poker table with 8 people. and you're asking yourself at the end of the day, what's the chances of you having the best hand without looking at cards? 12.5%, right? So you have like an 87% chance of losing. You think about business, you constantly hear about the premise of the 80/20 rule. Um,
Yeah.
you spend 80% of your time prioritizing the 20% that matters. Um, Even think about things like Pokemon VGC. I keep up a lot with competitive Pokemon, and most of the players that are successful in that game consistently, they only use moves that have an 85% accuracy or higher. Very rarely do they
Hmm.
do anything other than that, and very rarely do they use those moves with lower accuracy unless it's dependent on the game. If it's like win or lose no matter what, and that's the last option that they have. So in general, I think you're gonna find 85% to kinda be your baseline for consistency. Of course, if you are doing an event with more rounds, those calculations are going to adjust a little bit. But that basic formula, if you look at the percentage of games that you're going to play, you calculate the minimum number of games that you could lose and still win, and do that division, and that's gonna be what I would define as consistency as far as what your standard should be going into the event.
Okay.
Cool. So let's look at these open mulligans here with this dredge coup deck. As I said, the way the leader works is when one of your battle cards are KO'd, you get the opportunity to awaken right away. We utilize effectively 8 cards. Sun Gohan, potential one unlock, 3 copies. We run 1 copy of Human Shield Krillin. We run 3 copies of Supreme Kai of Time Regulator, and we run 1 copy of Toki Toki Time Creator. Toki Toki Time Creator effectively acts as another copy of Supreme Kai of Time, while also having the benefit of looking at your deck to figure out what cards are in your life. But ultimately, that means there's 8 cards that you have an opportunity to open, and that's really what we want to look at as far as what an opening can. So here's your basic rules of hypergeometric calculus. So we'll use x as the relevant consistency, the number that we're looking at. Um, C of x is called the complement of x, and a complement means the opposite percentage. If you added those numbers, would equal 100%. All that means is if I say you have a 95% chance of getting what you want, what percentage of a chance do you have of not getting what you want? What would that number be, Jose?
That would be 5.
Exactly. And then P being your probability, your actual consistency. Um,
Okay.
so as you see here, when we look over to the right here at this hypergeometric calculator, you have your population size, your number of successes in population, your sample size, and your number of successes in the sample.
Okay.
Now population size matters is the number of cards in your deck. So in a traditional Dragon Ball Super deck, you have 50 cards in your hand, right? The number of successes in the population, that would be the number of cards that fall under the category of what we're looking for. So if we're asking ourselves what's our chances of opening with a 1 drop, we're going to count all the 1 drop battle cards in our deck, and that's going to be the number of successes in our population. So in the example that we had with Dredgeku, you have 3 Supreme Kai, you have 1 Toki Toki, you have 3 of the Goku blocker, or 3 of the Gohan blocker, and 1 Krillin. So the number of successes in population would be, you know, Jose?
I do not.
It would be 8. So
8.
the yeah, the 3 Supreme Kai blockers, the 1 Toki Toki, and then
So
the
it will be my total of the cards that I need to see at the beginning.
exactly, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Your sample size, that's the number of cards that you're looking at. So in Dragon Ball Super,
Okay.
we draw 6 cards if you're going first. So your sample size would be
6.
6, exactly. And then the number of
And
successes, sorry.
so I have a question there.
Yeah.
In that case, when you mulligan, then um, so you don't need to include the extra cards that you're gonna see after you put them back.
So mulligans, so we'll hit mulligans in just a second.
Okay.
So as far as your opening hand, ignoring mulligans,
Okay.
that's what you would
Okay.
look like.
But this is
Um,
just drawing your first 6 cards before even doing mulligan. This is the
exactly.
probability of getting. Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. And the number of successes in the sample, that would be how many cards you want to see. So let's assume, so we'll use the search queue deck because it's 56 cards technically. 8 successes in the population, sample size of 6, and the number of successes in the sample. We want to draw at least 1 blocker. We really don't care how many we draw as long
Exactly.
as we see 1. So we hit calculate there, and we come up with a bunch of numbers. For most of your statistics, The bottom cumulative probability x equal to or greater than 1, that's the number that you're generally gonna look for. That's your chances of drawing at least that many copies. So as we see here with, 8 copies of a card in a 56 card deck, you have a 62% chance of opening that blocker pre-mulligan.
And
Um,
what does that mean in terms of cards? Like, what are is that the actual percentage of times that I gonna see it, or what does that number mean?
yeah, so if you were to test draw 100 times, you would and you drew 6 random cards and you shuffled equally with this deck how we have it built right now. 62.2% of those times, of those 100 hands you draw, would already have a blocker in it.
Okay, and that's treating the sample size as a single group. It's not evaluating every single card in your hand.
Correct. Because
Okay.
yeah, right, because where it gets complex is if you're considering already holding other. So, for example, if you're doing that mulligan, now let's say you kept 1 card in your hand, and then you're
Mhm.
still looking for a blocker, not do you stop doing that calculation with a population size of 56, you do it with 55, because one of those cards are accounted for,
Uh-huh.
and you already know that that's in your hand. So your population size becomes 55. The number of blockers become 8, assuming you haven't seen one. You're mulliganing 5 back, and you're doing a number of success and sample was still 1. So let's say you get your open hand, and you get that unison you want, because when we're playing the Dredge Q deck, um, your goal was to get a blocker for turn 1, and your second priority is getting you can play on. So let's say that you draw your unison, it's important enough, and you want to mulligan back. So after you get that, you want to figure out your stats. So you do again, you subtract the 1 card from the deck size, subtract 1 from the hand size, and now you still have a 55% chance of opening your
Oh,
blocker.
significantly, it drops significantly.
It does. And I think ultimately what matters is it's still greater than half. Which
Yes.
if you feel like that's like essential to hold that unison, you still have a favorable chance of catching them.
Okay.
Other than that, the other big thing that I think people make mistakes when they're doing this math is how life affects things. The way I generally look at life is at the end of the day, you can't control what cards are in your life. So for statistical purposes, they're basically at the bottom of the deck. Um, because you'll mess up your numbers because you can't control what cards in your deck or what cards are in your life. So it's
Right.
easiest when you're thinking of statistics to just pretend your life are deck, unless you're figuring out equations in which you're drawing cards that number of successes or sample size increases because you're picking up cards for your life.
Okay.
So going to the next slide. Um, so determining your Mulligan ratio. Um, this is where things get a little more complex. So again, you have this basic calculator that gets you your chances of getting one specific card. But what happens if you want to mulligan again? The equation for that is you want to do that basic statistic, assuming that you didn't mulligan at all. So 56 population, 8 cards in your deck, sample size of 6 1. We know that's a number of 62.
Okay.
So what you would do is you would take the complement of 62, which again that's the opposite that if you added those numbers it would equal 100.
It would be 38.
Correct. So what you do is you would multiply 38 by your new statistic. In this case, your new statistic would be you're mulliganing 6 cards and trying to get them back. So it's actually going to be the same number. So you would
Oh,
do
okay.
so you would do 0.38 times 0.38, and that number would be your probability of not opening what you want.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, what 0.38 times 0.38 is 0.14. So 100 minus 84 or 100 minus 14 is 86. So as long as you're starting with 56 cards, you have an 86% chance of opening a blocker.
Okay.
And what is our baseline for consistency?
We said uh wait, our baseline for consistency in general,
Yeah,
we said 83.4, I think
yeah,
it
yeah,
was.
about 84%. So in an
Okay.
8 round tournament, where you need to be successful, you don't want luck to negatively impact your success. 84% of the time. Having an 86% chance of opening the way that you want is what we would define as consistent score.
Okay.
Cool. Any questions so far?
Many, but for the sake of time.
Fair enough. So I could spend a lot of time going in depth about how this changes whenever you have 2 cards. But the basis of what you need to understand, is that whenever you are deciding the second card, let's say your goal was to get the blocker and the unison, in your opening hand. What
Okay.
you have to do is you have to account for every possible combination, which is in your first hand, you have none of those cards. For the situation, you have one of those cards. For the situation, you have both of those cards. So what you need to do is you need to do that same mulligan situation for all four of those cases. When you don't open with any, when you open with card A, when you open with card B, and when you open with both. And then you again would use that complement of the first X plus the times the complement of the second X to get your probability. You would take both of those factors and then apply it to the other card, and you'd have four different numbers, and then you would average all that. And then
Okay.
if you're being extra particular, you would then have to adjust that for going first and for going second, because you're seeing a second card or a seventh card when you go
Exactly.
second. So I usually don't dig that deep into it. Um, but that would be how you would approach that. If you have any questions about it, feel free to, make some comments
I
below.
do have two kind of fun questions because I am pretty sure that that's something that a lot of people are going to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Like, what is actually there's two things that I would like to calculate
Hmm.
if we have the time. Like, first of all, it would be like the chances of seeing the secret rare on the opening hand.
Yeah. So let's do that right
A
now. So let's say you have a 50 card deck, right? Number of successes in your population. There's
would be
one
one.
SCR. Yep. What would your sample size be for your first hand?
Yeah, we say a six, right?
Okay. And how many copies do you want to try to draw?
Only one.
Only one. Yep. So 5161. We punch in that calculation and we come up with a 12%.
So those folks that see the secret rare every single time on opening hand, you guys are very lucky. You should go to Vegas every weekend.
Correct. And if you're really excited and you want to figure out what it would be post Mulligan, uh, Jose, do you want to guess at what the process for that would be?
So then, let's say that I'm gonna keep at least one card,
Sure.
one good card. So I'm gonna change my sample size from six to one. No,
Six
sorry,
six
from
to five.
six. No, six to five. Correct.
Mm-hmm. And then your population size is going to change a little bit too.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to because now I'm seeing more cards, so I need to subtract five from that. So it's 45.
It'll be 49 because you're putting those five cards back
Oh
into
no,
your
I
deck.
kept one card in my hand. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be 49. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So you kept one card. So you have 12%, and the inverse of 100 is 88. Um, your new percentage is like 10.2. So you have to multiply the complements of that. So the complement of 12 is what?
88
Yep. And the complement,
multiplied by point 0.9.
yep. So 0.88 times zero point 0.9 gives us a probability of point point 0.8. So we have a 0.8% chance.
Well, that's not that bad.
Not the worst.
Not as bad as I expected.
Yeah. Cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. So,
The other exercise I wanted
oh
to
yeah.
try is um and this one involves in life, and we're doing this one for fun.
Hmm.
Like the probabilities of you having negates on your life.
Having a negate in your life. Okay. So that's so that's a little complex, and at that point in the game, it's not always helpful because at that point you have so much information about how many cards are in your deck that you can make a
Oh,
more accurate.
I'm saying at the beginning, only at
Okay.
the beginning.
Sure.
So assuming on the sample size of eight.
You want to know when you have what 3 life left, if any of those are in a gate, right?
Not even at 3 life, even at the beginning.
Okay,
So,
sure.
like, that somewhere in that 8 life, it could be the last life, or it
Okay,
could be the second to last life, that there's a negate
could be
there.
the first one. Okay, sure. Let's figure it out. So, how many cards do you want to play in this deck?
Let's do 52.
Okay. How many negates do you want in your life?
At least 1.
Okay, and how many negates do you run in your deck?
4.
Okay, so let's go this through. So what would the population size be then in that example?
52.
Yep. Number of successes in the population?
It should be 4.
Yep. Sample size?
8, because it's my 8 life.
Mhm. And how many are you looking for?
I'm looking for at least 1.
Right. Answer there? There is a 50% chance that you'll see one negate in your life.
So that's why people draw a lot of negates from life. 50% chance.
Right. Now which
That
one
makes
yeah.
a lot of sense.
Yeah, now which one that could vary a lot. But, if that's happening half the time, that means 50% of 50% of the time, it's in the bottom 4 of your life. So I guess so that's
Yeah.
what, a quarter of the time they're gonna have a
It's a
negate in
quarter of
your
the time. It's still really high.
yeah. Yeah, that means that it's almost gonna come up once every set, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. Cool. So,
Very helpful.
yeah. So, one of the really interesting things looking again at this Dredge Q deck is how we ended up with 56 cards, Goku trying to do the math himself. Um, and these are the kind of the premises that we sat on. We are finding that in the Series 10 format, games are lasting, anywhere from 3 turns and it gets an aggro deck to in a slow slugfest of a mirror, can be 6 or 7 turns. So the premise we sat on is that the leader should not have to swing more than 6 times in a game. So we asked
Correct.
ourselves, if our leader is swinging 6 times in a game, how many cards do we need to run in our deck to ensure that we're still getting full value? Because it feels really bad, not swinging with your leader and choosing not to burst or draw. But if on turn 4, if I have to use a Saiyan Instinct Son Goku, and 3 turns later I end up not being able to draw with my leader to accommodate, that feels really bad. So the
Yeah.
things we need to look at, are opening hands, how much we're bursting, how much we're drawing with our leader, um, how much our effects triggers, how many cards are in our deck at the beginning of the game after considering life, and then not to mention what effects that we have. So right now that list plays 3 Saiyan Instincts. It plays 4 super combos. 3 of those super combos draw a card. One of those super combos take a card out of the deck and put it into the drop. And then we're also playing 3 cantrips, cards that one drops that when you play it, you get to draw a card for free. So ultimately, there's an opportunity to uh, draw 6 cards from your Saiyan Instinct, and you can play resolve 7 abilities that allow you to mill. So if we do the math there, so we have a population of 56. We
Mhm.
have again we have 3 cantrips and 4 super combos. So we have 7 cards. Um, our sample size. So our question is how many of those we're gonna mill so we never get a chance to resolve, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So if we're going in a 6-turn game, we swing 6 times and our leader bursts 3, our sample size is going to be
18?
18. So what we're curious about, um, is how many of those we are going to mill. So let's say our chances of milling 4 of them, 14%. Oh, I'm having a brain fart here. Oh, no, that was right. So when we, our chances of milling 4, here I'm gonna look at the cumulative probability of X less than 4, which means we're gonna mill, less than 4 cards 85% of the time.
Okay.
So generally of those 7 cards that allow us to draw an additional card, we're gonna mill 3 or 4.
Okay.
So ultimately, when we consider all of that, drawing 6 cards for your opening hand, putting 8 cards in your life area, adding 6 cards that over these 6 times, these 6 turns you have, you're drawing. You're on the assumption you're going first. Um, plus 24 cards that your leader is responsible for. 6 every time you swing, you mill 3 and you draw 1. So that's 24. And now if you mill all 3 of your Saiyan instincts and resolve all 3 of them, and then let's say you we're erring on the side of conservative. So let's say we draw 4 of those super combos or cantrips. Um, that total equals 54 cards after 6 swings. Now, if you go second, you'll see one additional card because the first player doesn't draw the first turn of the game. So ultimately, that's 55 cards that you'll have seen or went through at the end of your sixth swing.
So that means that I got 6 turns before I deck myself out.
Right. Well, if you go first, it would be turn 7.
Okay.
But yeah, and then yeah, but if you're going second, again, yeah, you'd have 6 swings.
Okay.
And then at that point, um, there's a little bit of variance. If you don't resolve all of those cantrips, you may have one more turn, or you at that point that maybe is when you turn off your leader swing. But basically, that this guarantees the majority of the time we'd be able to not feel bad about activating our cards that make our deck size smaller. Does that methodology make
Awesome.
sense?
It does. Yeah.
Excellent. So, last but not least, how do we determine what cards we put in the deck that um to mill? Because on one end, if you don't have a lot of triggers like Sane Instincts or Master Roshi, Kamehameha Origins, you feel like you're not getting a lot of value out of that burst 3, and that's really why we're playing leader. Um, but on the flip side, if you run too many of them, you're gonna duck out, or I'm sorry, you're gonna draw so many bad cards that it doesn't feel like you have a lot of actions on your turn. So
Mhm.
how do you offset that? Um, Very simple math, actually. So as we see here, we have 3 copies of Hasty Dispo, 1 copy of Android 17, 2 copies of For the Greater Good, 4 copies of Kamehameha Origins, 4 copies of Ribrianne, 3 copies of Saint Instinct, and 1 copy of Android 21 Bad Omen. We can revive that off to save a hope for the future. So that's 18 cards that we get value out of milling. So let's come back to the calculator here. Population size, we have 56 cards. We're trying to figure out how many cards we can mill valuably. Um, so how many successful mill targets? We have, I think, 18
Um,
is what we came up with.
counting again. How many dispos? I cannot tell right
Three,
now.
yeah, 3 dispo,
So 3, 5, 6, 10, 14.
3 8.
Uh, yeah, 3 8. So yeah, 18. Yes.
Okay, number of successes we have 18. Um, so in a sample size, how many cards are we bursting on an average turn?
We are bursting 3.
Correct. And I think we're considering it a successful turn if we mill at least one of those, right?
Correct.
Cool.
Yes.
So if we do that math, then we come up with a 69% chance of milling at least one, or of milling one or more targets.
Wow, that's really good.
Very good. Um, the other interesting statistic here when we look at the other ones, that means that you have a 30% chance of milling 2 or more. So a third of the time you're going to hit 2 targets, which means that ignoring your other results, uh, when you swing 10 times as leader, 3 of those times you're going to hit 2 or more.
Wow.
If we're curious on how often we're going to hit 3, because in testing there has been more than one occasion that we've milled 3,
Oh my
right?
goodness. Yes.
Um, and the statistics for that isn't fantastic. It's about 3%.
Right. Right.
But the chances of hitting 2, uh, you're going to come up with,
Wow.
yeah,
Fourth of a time.
yeah,
Almost.
exactly, yeah. So it's a pretty interesting stuff. Um, the other way you can look at that statistic is in your 56 card deck. Um, you got 18. What was the other way I wanted to do that? Uh, Right, yeah, that was 60. But the other part of it is that, but that's not even considering your mulligan, right? So let's say you open well, and you open with one of your unisons, and you open with one of your battle cards, or like the one drop blocker that you won.
Mhm.
Now we want to figure out that new statistic. You want to take a guess at how those numbers change?
For we're doing for milling.
Yeah,
So now my my sample size is
you kept
four.
two, you,
Four.
you you kept 2 cards in your mulligan.
Okay, so that means that now population size is 54.
Correct. Now we can control how many cards you draw off the mill. So really what this statistic is helping us figure out is the average, right? Because sometimes you're gonna draw 4 4 Ribrianne off those 4 cards you draw, right?
Right,
But
right.
sometimes you're not gonna draw any of those targets. So what this calculation is an average. Um, so
Okay,
but with that average number of successes, we assume that's not gonna change.
right.
Your sample size, we're still bursting 3, and we still wanna know a chance of, hitting 1. So this 69.5% chance of hitting 1 or more, goes up 2%.
Oh, okay, okay.
So, understanding how those affect things. And I think those subtle, nuances, people don't spend a lot of time considering. Um, and when you are doing these calculations, again, all of these are on the assumption that we went first. If you're trying to get your actual averages, in a competitive sense, what I do is I do my calculations if I go first, and then again I do my calculations if I go second, and then I average those because you're gonna go first just as often as you go second, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a recap here. So let's say we go back to this trying to draw our blockers turn one. So our population size is 54 or 56. We have 8 blockers in the deck. Our sample opening size of 6. We want to know 1. So our chances in our mulligan is 62%, ignoring mulligans. But when we consider uh, drawing a mulligan, or we consider the mulligan, in those cases we start with 7 cards. But then also when you go second, you get the benefit of swinging with the leader, right?
Uh-huh.
So ultimately, I would do your sample size at 8 cards, and now ultimately that changes your statistic from 60 to 73%, and that's a huge difference between going first and going second, right?
Yeah. Okay. So and then in that case, because you're also milling 3 cards from your leader when you swing, do you need to include that sample size to be 11 now instead?
So not necessarily. So the majority of the time you wouldn't, because those cards aren't in your hand. If you're
Okay.
now if you're trying to do in practice statistics, then it would be, you could look at what those cards were and determine the chances in your deck by counting your deck. Realistic people don't usually spend that much time with it.
Hmm.
Um, so that's kind of the difference between like theoretical statistics and practice, right?
Okay.
Um, but what you could do specifically in this, like with this deck, you could mill like a hasty dispatch dispo and mill your blocker, and that would successfully allow you to do that.
Right.
But the statistics of that happening are so low that it's not worth um, doing the math on it.
It's
Or
super
you,
negligible.
yeah, exactly. Or you just assume it's like 1 or 2%. Add that to your average.
Okay.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of the TLDR on how to handle geometric calculations. But it's a lot to it. Um, but again, I think the big takeaways here, understanding how to use this calculator to draw your opening hands, understanding how to slightly adjust that whenever you think about how many cards you're seeing, how many things you're drawing. Back when we were doing the wish decks, Shenron was always a really fun time because you not only did you count uh, like, you go first, you search your 2 balls, but if you draw a ball into a ball, those balls don't really count as a deck, right?
Right.
So, like, in that case, your 50-card deck, um, it's not really 53 cards, they're 50, it's really like 43, right? Because they're free. And then if you go first, you had 6 cards, plus you drew 2 balls off your leader, so it's more like you had, you know, 8 cards in your opening hand, and you're wondering your chance of drawing 1 of 8 of your 1 drops. That's like 83% on its own.
Wow.
You don't even have to mulligan for your opening hand. You can just mulligan for Dragon Balls, mulligan for whatever you need to go off in turn 2, 3, 4. But understanding how those cards apply, and then of course if you're using leaders like Yellow Broly, which is, you swing, you draw a card, you pick up a life, um, that's going to severely adjust uh, how many cards you see in your first turn. But definitely giving respect to both going first, going second, and then understanding how to average those to get your realistic practice. But yeah,
Fantastic.
there's your lecture with Professor Zapp and Professor Mercado. Thank you
I
for
am a student Mercado, I think.
uh, um, do you have any other suggestions for individuals that, are interested in looking at deck building from this perspective?
Yeah, I think the this is really really important. Not only and uh, we're working hard here to make sure that it's appealing to you guys and appealing to everybody, and to make it as easier to understand as possible. But we want you guys to like really internalize this, even if you don't go to exactly through every single calculation, but at least get a feel on what's the best approach to building your deck, right? Because many times, and I am guilty as charged of this, what I'm about to say. I build decks and then I suddenly don't see the cards that I want, and it's because I haven't done this exercise. And
Mhm.
then I get frustrated and I completely discard the deck. It's like, no, like let's go through the thought process. Let's invest I don't know, an additional 10-15 minutes to figure it out, like, oh, how many copies of this card I should be using. How many cards am I gonna drop per turn? Because that's very significant. It's gonna drive your gameplay to a whole different level. And it's gonna drive your thought process per turn to a different level as well, because now you're gonna be like, okay, I have 10 cards on deck. I'm still at 7 life. I know my hand. Okay, can I draw the negate for next turn? Now it brings a whole different level of interaction, mind games, and setup that you can steal games.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly, yeah, and making those decisions to play to win versus playing to not lose. At the end of the day, people yell at, or get frustrated because they happen to draw the one out. Well, what if they're playing on the assumption that drawing that one out was the only way to win?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, you bring up a good point. I think a lot of people, they test draw twice with the deck, and they're like, "Wow, doesn't draw anything. This isn't playable." Um, in a lot of those cases, the fact of the matter is that they're using a small sample size. Very rarely do people build decks and test draw 100 times to determine the consistency of the deck that
Yeah.
they're playing. And that's the difference between theory and practice. And at the end of the day, there are different characteristics, different metagame implications that decide if what you're doing, if the theory holds true or not. But if you're building with a solid theory in mind, you can go to that regional, and instead of it's just hoping that you draw well, it's now I have a theory that if I apply this metagame theory plus this deck building theory, I should be able to achieve these results on a regular basis. And then you go in and you play well. At the end of the day, it's either your theory was wrong or you landed on the wrong side of variance. And understanding the math behind the
Exactly.
variance is how you can
And
reassure yourself.
that's what I was gonna build on. That is that now you can just sit down in front of the best player, the player that you think is the best player in the game right now,
Jose Mercado.
and you can be super confident because you know what, you did your math. Your deck is gonna perform like you built it. So there's no reason to be worried that your deck is gonna break. Your deck is not gonna do what it's not supposed to be doing, and you're going to be in your best shape possible to fight that worthy adversary that you have always been concerned about beating.
I
Because
love it.
at the end of the day, it's whoever makes the least amount of mistakes. And if your deck is already like fine tuned to that sense, then it's only a matter of playing smart, and that's it. Just play your game. Do what you got to do.
And that's all you can do, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's the better player is, who the deck building is. Uh, you have a population size of two. Only one person can win, and in a sample size of two, the chance of getting one person to get there, uh, one of those people are going to win, and there's a 50% chance that it's you.
Exactly. Yep.
And at the end of the day,
Exactly.
yeah, gotta do. All right, man. Well, hey, thank you
Awesome.
for your time and insight. I hope you all enjoyed it. I definitely check out the Patreon, check out the YouTube channel some more. If there's anything you're unfamiliar with, let us know if this is something you appreciated. We're definitely happy to take some time to tackle some of these subjects more in depth or at length. Something that's appreciated. It's definitely something that's complex. But I hope that we did a good job of showing you some easy, simple, introductory methodologies that you can apply to your deck building, and hopefully that gets you the results that you're looking
Yeah.
for.
And private messages are possible. So feel free to message us if you have any questions. Uh, Questions and comments are encouraged. So yeah, like Zap said, let us know if there's any more topics, like any other in-depth any in-depth topics that you want us to go through. There's things like uh, card selection, like exploiting unfair. What does unfair mean, right? So this
Mhm.
is some of the things that we talk a lot, right? It's all this card is super unfair. Let us know. Let us know what you guys think and what you guys want us to talk about. This is all for you guys. We just want everybody to grow.
All we want you to do is see you guys get those done. That's all we've ever wanted. All right. Thank you, Jose. Thank you all for
Thank
watching. Till next time, Grub fam is best fam. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.